A Medieval Brickyard at Hull, a paper published by F. W. Brooks in 1939, published in the British Archaeological Association. In spite of much recent work on the organization and working conditions of medieval masons, very little is known about the parallel work of the medieval brickmaker. From the accounts published by Professor J. Knopp and Dr. J. P. Johnson, we have learned much about building in stone, from the quarrying of stone to the completion of the building, but no similar documents permit us at present to trace the progress of a building in brick along the same line. It is true that the build around certain bricks buildings have been published, for example, this of the North Bar at Beverly, and that we are now adequately informed about the price of medieval bricks and the wages of medieval brickmakers. But as far as I am aware, no effort has yet been made to show the medieval brickmaker as distinct from the bricklayer at work, or to carry the story of a brick building back to what corresponds to the quarrying stage in a stone building. It has been known for many years to local historians that the Corporation of Hull owned and worked a brickyard during the medieval ages, that it was part of the business of the Broad Chamberlain to render an account of its profit and expenses. But nobody has seen fit to publish this account. Hull was certainly not unique in owning a brickyard. Beverly probably had one as early as Hull, and Lincoln at the end of medieval age, while it is quite probably searched among us the records of other towns in predominantly brick-using area might reveal several other instances. Where Hull may have been unique was in keeping the brickyard in its own hands, rather than letting it to the contractors as an annual rent, or, to employ a modern phrase, in working it by direct labor. The publication, therefore, of a portion of the Hull Chamberlain's role relating to the brickyard in tilery, as it was called, seemed a valuable starting point for the study of the organization and working method of medieval brickyard. One of the strangest phenomena in human history is the way in which certain crafts or processes can be practiced and brought to a considerable degree of excellence, and then, for a period which may be extended to several centuries, be entirely lost to sight and memory. Suger decorated the Abbey of St. Denis with mosaics in the second quarter of the 12th century, after which the art of mosaic work seemed to have lapsed in northern Europe until the Renaissance. The medieval technique of stained glass seems similarly to have lapsed for several centuries after the introduction of the enamel technique, 16th century. But perhaps the strangest example of a lost craft is of the brickmaking, one of the earliest of all crafts, as the history of Jew in Egypt, to say nothing of the excavations in the Near East show, used in various forms until the end of the Roman Empire. It disappeared completely in England for a long period after the Saxon invasion. Thorough Rogers held that it was unknown in England from Roman times almost to the beginning of the 15th century. Thanks to the work of Dr. John Wilson, we know that the Rogers was mistaken, being misled by the fact that what we call bricks are always referred to in the medieval accounts as wall tiles, or often simply as tiles. This explains the problem which puzzled Rogers. who comment on the fact that while the medieval craftsman would make tiles for flooring or roofing, he was unable to apply his technique to the identical work of making bricks. But although recent research has shown that bricks were used and made in England much earlier than rather supposed, as early, at any rate, as the beginning of the 13th century, it still remains true that for as we know at present, the art of brickmaking was lost in England for some 7 or 8 centuries. Such surviving Saxon buildings as contain brickwork are invariable near Roman cities, and measurement of the bricks has shown, so far as it is a guide, that the Saxon builders merely reused Roman bricks. The art never died out so completely on the continent. In Italy, it continued throughout the Middle Ages. In France, brick were frequently, though seldomly exclusively, used in Carolingian buildings, though it is very difficult to say to what extent these were reused Roman bricks. Bricks were out of favor during the Romanesque period, and one may add during the 13th century, except in certain districts, of which Toulouse and Flanders are the most important. Saint Sernin, Toulouse, and the Cathedral of the Books, both dating from the 12th century or earlier, can be cited as example. Enlert also mentions the St. Bernards, made or used by the Cistercians, which were made with holes in them to facilitate both firing and the adherence of mortar when used. In England, the earliest example of medieval brickwork is Little Rockshall Abbey, dating from 1200 to 1270. Little Warham Hall 1280 follows. These examples are earlier than anything which survives in the East readings, though some of the bricks discovered in the excavation at Melks Abbey by Birtlax and Walker may well date from the mid-13th century. For the 14th century, however, we have adequate writing evidence of the production of bricks in the district, not to mention numerous surviving brick buildings. The earliest brickwork in the Holy Trinity Hall must date from somewhere between 1290 and 1320. Almost contemporary are the bricks used to fill in the panels of the vault of the nave of Beverley Minster, 1320-1340, and other side of the Humber, the beautiful brick gatehouse of Thornton Abbey date from 1382. It has long been thought that bricks building was introduced into England from Flanders. The argument is based on the existence of brick buildings in Flanders during the 12th centuries and the fact that the earliest use of bricks occurred in England in those parts of the country, which may be presumed to be in contact with Flanders. It is, however, equally possible that it was introduced from Toulouse, for it's significant that bricks appear to have been reintroduced into England shortly after the time when, under the Henry II, England came to contact with the country of Toulouse. The use of bricks in this of England may be due to the absence of other building materials rather than the proximity with Flanders. In Hull, at any rate, there is no direct proof that bricks were made or brick building done by Flemings or in Beverley either, for that matter. The question is one which it is impossible to settle, but the possibility of Provençal rather than Flemish origin, our English brickwork, can hardly be ignored. Of the early organization of the brickmaking trade, we are in complete ignorance. By the 14th century, there were acutes of tailors at Beverley and elsewhere, and the term tailors undoubtedly included brickmakers. But the existence of large brick buildings in places remote from town at the times when the transport of large quantity of bricks must have been very difficult seems to point to some nomadic form of organization such as we found amongst contemporary masons. When it was decided to build the brick building in a remote site, the brickmakers probably went first and digged out enough clay for the purpose, tempered made bricks and fired them on or near the site of the buildings. For example, the pit from which, according the local tradition, the bricks of Thornton Abbey are still pointed out to the visitors. That it was a common practice to use the earth from the foundations to make the bricks for the house in Jacobin, London, is abundantly provided by the numerous proclamations forbidding the practice. One difficulty that the medieval brickmaker had to contend with was that of getting his raw material. The Beverley tailors fell foul of the monks of Melks in 1380 for digging clay from the banks of the river Hall in the land of the monastery. We must remember that without some form of pumping apparatus, a clay pit would soon fill with water, and thus compel the brickmakers to seek a new site. It was probably this which led to the abandonment of the old tailoring. Since the technique of brick building lapsed for so long in the Middle Ages, for description of the technique process, we are compelled to rely on much later authorities. Several such accounts have been collected by the late Mr. Lloyd in his book on English brickwork, and one of the most valuable features of the whole account is that they enable us to check a 16th and 17th century description of the art of brickworking with what must have been the practice in the 14th century. The process of brickmaking probably changed very little from the Middle Age to the introduction of machinery in the 19th century. In general, the method was somewhat as follows. During the winter, the clay was dug and allowed to lie so that the frost and rain could pulverize it. It was then tempered, water being poured on it and being trodden, usually with bare feet, until it was about consistency of a dough. Unless this process was properly carried out, bricks soon decayed, which account for the stringent regulations made by the London Brickmakers' Company, and such status as that of the Edward IV in 1477, which enacted that the earth should be dug before November 1st, stored and done before the following February, and not made up before March. When the clay had been tempered, a sufficient quantity was placed on a table, previously sanded. This the maker filled a mold, which frequently seemed to have been made in 2 compartments, cutting off any surplus with a wooden strike. The bricks were then either turned out on the board, which was removed by the carrier, or sometimes the carrier took the mold away and turned out the brick on the hackstead or drying ground. The mold was then sanded afresh and given back to the maker. Very frequently a stock was used. This was a piece of board half an inch thick and just big enough for the mold to slip down on. This helped the maker to mold his brick more quickly. The earliest illustrations quoted by Lloyd do not show the stock in use, but it is certain that it was used in the 15th century. When the bricks had been molded, they were put to dry on the hackstaff, being placed crosswise about 10 courses high and covered with straw and left for a month. When the brick had been dried, they were taken to the kiln for firing. The term plumb is sometimes used by Elizabethan documents interchangeably with kiln. In any case, kiln were certainly used in Hull. The first information we have of the existence of the brickyard comes from the Minister of Crown for Hull in 1303-04, where mention is made of annual rent of 13 shillings and 4 dimes paid for the tilery to the crown and of an output of 54,350 brick in 1303. By 1324, it appears either that the original site had been worked out and a new one was sought, or that it was intended to extend the existing site, for in that year the chamberlains Richard de la Pole and his brother William included in their expenses under a heading Impessio Terre. The next chamberlain's roll to survive is that of 1394-95, with which begins the series of detailed accounts of the working of the tilery, and these continue up the rolls of 1437-38, in which the entries show no profits, although the tilery forms a separate item on the credit side of the chamberlains. Rolls for some years after this, invariably a nil return is made, and by 1443 the chamberlains were buying bricks for repairs to the property. Obviously, the tilery was worked out, but as corporation property had to be included in the chamberlain's account. Also, the gross in the tiler croft was usually sold of a trivial amount, except when in ex abundantia equo no profit could be made from it. We can thus put the effective life of the whole brickyard at 125 years. Whether, however, it was being worked continuously for the whole period is entirely uncertain, but very unlikely. No mention of the output is made, for example in the rolls of 1322-24, and though it is mentioned in the rolls of 1406-07, no brick appear to have been made that year. The site of the brickyard was undoubtedly where the Junction and Prince Dock now stand. Leland in 1540 saw a tilery without the south side of the town, wherewith the walls and the house of Kingston were built. The exact location of the site is given in the 17th century lease, in which the boundaries of the property conveyed are given as being: on the east the street now taken into the town walls, and the north the tilery, on the south the road to Mayton. In the nature of things, the site can hardly have been a very large one. Over the period of which our city can be relied upon, the average output was 92,000 tiles per annum, or perhaps a little more, since it includes those in hand in 1394-95 as being a complete year output. By great good fortune of the outgoing chamberlains in 1425, made a note of stock of implements in tilery, which enable us to get a clear idea of the equipment of a medieval brickyard. It comprised 4 wheelbarrows, 3 sand tubes, 3 flags, 1 tall and 5 mold. In addition, we learned from the accidental mention of the account that there were other implements on hand, such as coil racks, shovels, and water taps. The whole yard seemed to have been specialized purely in the manufacture of bricks, even to what might be considered an absurd extent. Not only are bricks the only thing mentioned in the output, but then the Tyler house was rebuilt or repaired in 1424-25. The Chamberlains actually bought 2,400 roofing tiles, nor was this due to any more temporary shortage. All through the period when the tilery was working, we found the Chamberlains buying and roof tiles when they were needed for building or repairing corporation property, while at least the bricks were often, though not invariably, supplied from the brickyard. It is perfectly clear that by the 15th century, brickmaking was practiced apart from the tile making. In spite of assumption made by some writers that bricks, tiles, and bridge tiles were originally made in the same yard. If we try to get a mental picture of the whole tilery, we shall see a fairly small enclosure, and all probably walled, and certainly surrounded by a ditch. The wall, we must assume, I think, from references to the tilery gate. The ditch certainly existed and cost the Chamberlain something to keep clear of weed and mud. Inside the enclosure were the clay pit, the kiln, and the tail house, with a level space on which the unbaked bricks were stood to dry. Brickyards are usually dirty and wet places, and the tilery was no exception. Probably it was knee-deep in mud and water, and the Chamberlains occasionally provided food for the workmen employed there. The tile house was probably a structure like those masons' lodges, which we see occasionally in 15th century miniatures, except that whereas there were mere open sheds, the tile house had walls, curiously enough, of mud and stud, not brick. In 1423, the tile house was either built or extensively repaired. 21 trees and 24 spars were bought of the cost of 10 shillings and 3 dimes, including carriages, and John Rangel, the slatter, and his mate, Richard Sceffling, with 2 men, and Richard Saltwell, were employed on sawing the timber, roofing, and daubing the walls. 2 years later, the tile house was again repaired or rebuilt. 24 spars, a post with wivers and ash tree, 2 oak spars, and 3 for the door were provided, and William Carpenter and his mate spent 4 days and a half in getting these sawed and shaped and put in position. Then 2,400 roof tiles, 1,100 buttons, and 1,250 small buttons were provided, and John Rangel, the slatter, and his mate John Monk spent 8 days on the roof. Meanwhile, sharpenings and nails had been provided, and Adam Ingram contracted for the job of daubing the walls for 24 shillings. 6 wainscots were then bought for the doors and the ledges. and William Wright spent 5 days making the doors and other wooden work, and thus a rough barn-like structure was built in which John Drinkel and his fellows could mold their bricks and sit all night when they were employed in the business of watching the kilns. The kiln itself would doubtless be beehive-shaped construction similar to those 18th century kilns, which one occasionally seen in remote parts of the country. Its capacity must have been rather more than 35,000 bricks, for 75,000 were fired in 2 kilnfuls in 1395 and 135,000 in 3 kilnfuls in 1433. The fuel used in the coal distillery was oyster, probably cut either in the How Valley or more probably on the banks of Humber. On one occasion, turf was bought at Ausfleet. It always came to the distillery by boat. Elsewhere in medieval England, the usual fuel seemed to have been wool. 84,000 turfs were required to fire 1 kiln. From any account, it would be rather difficult to follow the sequence of the manufacture. The chamberlains naturally charged against the distillery such non-recurrent expenses as the repair of the tilehouse. Also, they seem to have entered up the expenses for the distillery in no sort of order, probably entering up each item as they found the receipt for payment. Still, taking the account as a whole, we can get a fairly clear picture of the sequence of manufacture. During the winter, the clay was tempered occasionally. In 1395, not all the tempered clay was used, and it was then left over for the next year. The next stage seemed to have been the repairing of tools. New molds are made at the cost of 4 dimes each and bound with iron for 6 dimes. Tubs and barrows are hooped and repaired. Then the ground is prepared for the reception of the bricks, dikes and cleaned out by John Drinkel, who seemed to have been the general factotum distillery, and whom we see suitably equipped with a pair of new boots at the expenses of the chamberlains. Cleaning out the cellar dike and ousing the water in that dike and bus dike, Romans, which probably mean spacers for the hackstead, are cleaned in preparation for the next stage, the molding of the bricks. Sand, as we have seen, is a necessity at this stage, and each full is bought and taken from the ship by the town porters to the distillery. John Drinkel, William, his brother, Thomas Tokill, and other men mold tiles, usually working on contract and not by the day. Meanwhile, nets have been made to cover the bricks during the drying process. What exactly these were, we have no means of saying, but they were probably cloths of some sort, as we have reference to the purchase of glory and sail threads for making the nets. Sometimes they were supplied ready-made by Alice Lincoln, and at the other times made on premises. They were supported over the bricks on sticks which were bought from Cottingham. References to the purchase of canvas of this purpose make it probable that they were raw covers to keep off the rain. A fair amount of straw and hay was usually bought, either for an immediate covering of the unbaked bricks or for packing when the bricks were dispatched. Then shiploads of turf were brought for firing the kiln, and the kiln cleaned out. Generally, it was found necessary to repair it. Repairs to the kiln mount and site frequently occur at this stage. Then the bricks were fired. At first, the invaluable Drinkel and William Scotter seem to have been responsible for this. But after the their occasion in 1427, when 10,000 bricks were spoiled, an expert, Robert Potok, was fetched from Beverley for the job. We catch glimpses at this stage of Drinkel and his fellows stacking the bricks in the kiln, helping to stoke the fire with turf, and watching the kiln by day and night, usually for something like 5 days. This process was usually repeated at least twice, sometimes 4 times during the summer. The bricks, when made, sold throughout the period at 5 shillings per thousand. Working out the average cost of these years when we have complete record, we found that it was a fraction under 4 shillings and 9 dimes per thousand. The margin of profit, therefore, was exceedingly small. It would certainly have paid the chamberlains better to have followed the example of the governors of Beverley and leased the Tylery. The governors of Beverley in 1391 let Grovel Dyke, the Richmond Hamundson, and 2 others for 3,000 bricks per annum, thus getting as much profit as the whole chamberlains got an output of 60,000 bricks without any trouble to themselves. The accounts give some rather interesting information about the wages of the medieval brickmaker and the type of man employed, and also show in unmistakable fashion and development of the contract system. In fact, during the short period covered by the rolls, the chamberlain tried every method of working the brickyard, from direct employment of their own workpeople to the employment of subcontractors for the greater part of the work, with several intermediate variations. In 1396, they employed laborers to temper the clay at 4 dimes per day, but contracted out the making and firing at the rate of 1 shilling 4 dime per thousand. In 1423, direct labor was the method used. John Palmer, John Drinkel, and John Wotton were employed in making bricks at approximately 1 shilling per thousand. They also cleaned the rooms on day or peacetime rain. The filling and emptying of the kiln was done by the same man, but paid for at 4 dimes, which seemed at this period to have been slightly less than craftsmen pay in Hull. At any rate, John Rangel, the slaughterer, had 4 dimes a day in the same year. On the other hand, when Drinkel helped to get in sand to the Tylery, he only had 4 dimes per day, the wage of a journeyman. When the kiln was fired, Southwell and Drinkel had 6 dimes per day. From this, it would appear that they were regarded as competent to do all the work in connection with the making of the bricks. Drinkel, in fact, seemed to have been sometimes something of a general factum to the town. We met him frequently in the Chamberlain rolls, not only working in the Tylery, but also cleaning out sewers, helping in repairs to the gate, walls, and corporation property, and occasionally giving hand in the repairs of the Humber Bank. Nor is this all. Occasionally he buys the herbage in the Tylery. The existence of such men as this very interesting point. At a time when it is usually assumed that guild organization was very strict, we found a man presumably doing a variety of jobs, skilled and unskilled, and even buying and herbage, either as a speculation or for his own use. From such a person to the contractor is a mere step, a step which Drinkel himself may have taken. For while this item, the item Drinkel et Socius, which occurs in later accounts, is most probably a convenient compendium, it may mean that Drinkel hired his own labours for such jobs as emptying the kiln, while the payment for his purpose of Drinkel and 70 bussos seem to put the probability even higher. Whether Drinkel and Sudwell were not sufficiently skilled at firing the brick does not appear, but in 1425 William Scott undertook to fire 3 kilns of bricks for £2 13 shillings for dime. This seemed to have been solely for firing, as Drinkel was responsible for filling and emptying kiln and for making the bricks. Potter, at any rate, was a unsatisfactory workman, for that year the Chamberlain had to give a rebate of 1 shilling for 8 dime per thousand on 10,000 bricks which they sold to the churchwarden of St. Mary's. The result was that we hear no more of William Potter. In the following year, a Beverley expert, Robert Potok, contracted to fire the brick at 36 shillings for 2 kilns, virtually the same price as Potter had charged. Wotton and Drinkel continued to be responsible for tempering and for filling and emptying the kiln and for watching the fires. In 1428, Potok again contracted for the firing, but the tempering and possibly the moulding was done by John Drinkel, William Drinkel, and Thomas Tockin. The latter can probably be identified with the Thomas Tuckhill, who in 1430 seemed to have undertaken most of the work of the tilery. He presumably made all the tiles, though Drinkel and his mate did most unspecified repairs to the tilery during that year, and it would appear that the large payment of £9 9 shillings for dime included firing as well as making, for the account does not contain any separate item for firing, and in any case we know that making only cost 1 shilling per thousand, which on the 105,000 brick turnout in this year would not amount to the payment to the Tuckhill. In the following year, Tuckhill reappears again. He tempers the clay, molds and fires the bricks, and even repairs a burrow and hires the men to watch the fires when the bricks are burned. 2 years later, he is still doing the work for the tilery, but now he appears to have contracted for filling, firing, watching and emptying the kiln, instead of doing each job separately, and possibly under various methods of payment. He seemed to have charged £3 3 shillings for the full operation of each kiln. He also undertook in this year the digging and tempering of the clay and the moulding of the brick, and went to Horsfleet at the Chamberlain expenses to buy 3 boat loads of turfs for firing. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that Tuckhill, alias Tuckhill, was the contractor who undertook practically the whole of the work of the tilery. The Chamberlains paid for equipment and material. This is the latest account we have of the tilery in working order. The accounts are missing from 1433 to 1436. In the account of 1436-37, The tilery merely accounted for Herbert, though under the heading Diverse Reparation, a payment is recorded to William Day for diking a kiln full of mud in the tilery for agreed amount 5 shillings. Was it intended to have this temporary for the brick building, or was it used for mud and stud walls? We have no means of saying. All we know is that 1,000 bricks used for the manhole in this same year were bought by the Chamberlains from Seaman Burton. What had happened in the tailory? One of two things. Either the clay was worked out, or else drop in the price of bricks made it no longer worth working. 1440. The Chamberlain bought bricks at 3 shillings 4 dimes per thousand, and in the following year at 4 shillings per thousand. As we know, production costs in the brickyard were about 4 shillings 9 dimes per thousand. May then have been this drop which caused the tailory to close down. On the other hand, one might have expected that in the case the plant in the tailory could have been kept in hand in hope of reopening at any rate for a few years. But we have no trace of it being sold by the Chamberlains, though there are almost invariable 1 or 2 items included in various accounts made under the heading Bona Vendita, such as old sails from the ferryboat, timber, and so forth. If the tailory became worked out and was abandoned, the stock may have been sold and included in the lost account for 1433-36. But these arguments are unsatisfying. Still, whatever problems leave unsolved, the account for the whole tailory do throw a considerable light on the technique and the finesse of the medieval brickmaking, for which archaeologists may be duly grateful. This is the end of today's story. I hope that the past minutes helped you relax and ease you in falling asleep. If you are not 100% there yet, let us just do a breathing exercise. Count mentally with me your breath intakes and exhales. Concentrate on the counting, nothing more. Intake for 1, 2, 3, 4, and release for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In for 1, 2, 3, 4. Out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.